The Draconis Empire stretched across 70 star systems like a web of fire and steel. For 6 million years, it had stood as the greatest civilization the galaxy had ever known. The Parathi ruled this empire, beings that resembled the dragons from ancient Earth legends, but far more magnificent and terrible. Each one stood 20 feet tall, their scales shimmering with colors that seemed to shift between gold, crimson, and bronze. When they moved, light danced across their bodies like flames on water. These creatures did not speak as humans did. Their voices were deep harmonic sounds that resonated through the air, making the bones of smaller species vibrate with each word. Their breath was not mere fire, but pure plasma that could melt stone into liquid and turn metal into vapor. They had built cities of crystal and steel that reached into the clouds, created technology that bent the laws of physics, and explored corners of the universe that other species could only dream about. But even the mightiest empires must face their end, just as the brightest stars eventually burn out. Queen Ashera the Eternal lay dying in her chamber at the heart of the capital city. The room was carved from a single mass of crystal that glowed with its own inner light. She rested on a platform of pure diamond. Her once brilliant scales now faded to the dull gray of ash. For 3,000 years she had ruled the Parathi, watching over a people with wisdom earned through countless centuries. But now her time was ending, and with it, perhaps the time of all Parathi. Around her gathered the remaining leaders of her species. There were only a handful now. The empire that once boasted millions of Parathi could now count barely 40,000 souls. Each face showed the same expression, grief mixed with hopelessness. Commander Vekrith stood closest to the queen. His crimson scales bore the scars of 100 battles fought over 6 centuries of service. His amber eyes, which had witnessed the rise and fall of entire civilizations, now held only sadness. He was a leader of the Parathi Seekers, the elite warriors who had once explored the farthest reaches of space. Now he watched his queen die, unable to do anything to stop it. The problem had begun 1,000 years ago. Parathi children simply stopped being born. At first, the scientists thought it was a temporary phenomenon, perhaps caused by environmental factors or dietary changes. But as decades turned into centuries, the truth became clear. Something had gone wrong with Parathi genetics at a fundamental level. They had become sterile, unable to reproduce. Every medical advancement, every scientific breakthrough, every desperate experiment had failed to solve the problem. The youngest Parathi was 700 years old. There would be no more children. The species was dying, one member at a time, with no hope of replacement. Ashera struggled to breathe, each exhale releasing small wisps of plasma that dissipated harmlessly in the air. She raised one massive claw with great effort and gestured toward an ancient holographic projection floating nearby. The image showed text written in the oldest Parathi language, symbols that predated even her long reign. "The prophecy of the kindred flame," she whispered, her voice barely audible even to Parathi ears. "I thought it was merely a story when I was young. Now I believe it may be our only hope." Vekrith approached the projection, his eyes scanning the ancient words. He had heard of this prophecy, but had never taken it seriously. It spoke of a time when the Parathi would face extinction, and salvation would come from an impossible source, a being from another species who carried the dragon's essence within their very soul. The text described specific genetic markers that would identify this prophesied heir. The being would have exceptional thermal regulation, maintaining body temperatures far above normal for their species. They would possess aggressive protective instincts, feeling compelled to defend those weaker than themselves. Most importantly, they would carry an unusual neural pattern that the ancient Parathi had called the fire behind the eyes. "My queen," Vekrith said carefully, "are you suggesting we search for an alien who might carry Parathi genetics?" The probability seems impossibly small. Ashara's breathing grew more labored. Each word clearly cost her tremendous effort. In ancient times, our ancestors sent experimental seed ships to distant worlds. Ships carrying our genetic material, meant to study how our biology might adapt to different environments. Most were lost. Some crashed on primitive worlds. Their contents may have mixed with native species. Vekrith felt his heart rate increase, a sensation he had not experienced in decades. "You believe one of these ancient experiments might have succeeded?" That somewhere in the galaxy, a being exists who carries dormant Parathi DNA. I am commanding you to find out, Ashera said, her voice gaining momentary strength. You have 1 year, Commander. Search every world, scan every species, follow every lead, find a kindred flame, or watch our people become nothing but dust and memory. The Queen's eyes began to dim, her life force fading. Vecrith bowed his great head, pressing his foreclaw to his chest in the traditional Parathi salute. Around him, the other leaders did the same. I will not fail you, my queen, Vecrith promised. If this prophesied heir exists anywhere in this galaxy, I will find them. Ashera managed a faint smile before her eyes closed. She was not dead yet, but her time was measured in months now, perhaps only weeks. The greatest ruler the Parathi had ever known was slipping away, and with her, the last hope of her species seemed to fade as well. Unless the impossible was somehow true, unless somewhere among the billions of worlds and trillions of beings in the galaxy, one individual existed who carried the fire of the Parathi in their blood. Vecrith left the chamber and immediately began organizing his search. Within hours, his fleet of seeker ships launched into space, spreading across the galaxy in the most desperate hunt the Parathi had ever undertaken. They were searching for a miracle, for something that logic said could not exist. They were searching for the kindred flame. 14 months had passed since Vecrith began his desperate search across the galaxy. His fleet had visited 300 worlds, scanning billions of beings, finding nothing but disappointment. The seeker ships had traveled to the farthest corners of known space, examining every species that showed even the slightest possibility of carrying Parathi genetics. Each time, the results came back negative. Queen Ashera had only weeks left to live, perhaps days. Then, on a routine scan of an unremarkable system in a distant sector, the sensors detected something impossible. The signal came from a small blue planet orbiting a yellow star, a world the locals called Earth. The planet was home to a primitive species called humans, barely noticed by the galactic community. They had not yet achieved faster-than-light travel, and were considered technologically backward by most advanced civilizations. But one individual on that planet showed genetic markers that matched the ancient prophecy exactly. His name was Li Taeyong, and he was 13 years old. Vecrith watched the boy from orbit for 3 days, studying him through surveillance equipment. Taeyong lived in what humans called a foster home, a temporary residence for children without parents. He had been moved between 13 different homes in his short life, unwanted and unloved. The reports described him as difficult, aggressive, prone to fighting. But Vecrith saw something else. He saw a boy who protected smaller children from bullies. He saw someone who fought not for pleasure, but to defend those who could not defend themselves. He saw the fire behind the eyes. On the 3rd night, Vecrith descended to Earth in his ship, landing in an alley behind Taeyong's foster home. He allowed himself to become partially visible, his cloaking field dropping just enough that someone looking directly at him might see his true form. Taeyong came, as Vecrith somehow knew he would. The boy climbed out his window and walked straight toward the dragon without hesitation, without fear. When they stood face to face, Vecrith saw the boy's eyes clearly for the first time. They held a faint amber glow that no human eyes should possess. They stared at each other in silence, and something passed between them, a recognition that transcended species or language. Vecrith returned the next night with a translation device. This time, they could speak properly. The dragon told the boy everything. The dying Parathi civilization, the ancient seed ship that crashed on Earth millions of years ago, the genetic material that had somehow mixed with early human ancestors, and how Taeyong was the first human in all of Earth's history in whom this dormant bloodline had fully awakened. Your high body temperature, your protective rage, the glow in your eyes, Vecrith explained. These are not human traits. They are Parathi traits, sleeping in your DNA until now. Taeyong listened to all of this with an expression that cycled between disbelief and wonder. So I'm part alien dragon? In essence, yes. The question now is, will you come with me? Will you attempt to become the heir my species desperately needs? What happens if I refuse? Vecrith's voice carried no judgment, only honest truth. My species continues its slow march toward extinction. You remain here, living your current life. The choice is yours, young one. I will not force you. Taeyong looked back at the foster home where he lived. He thought about the 13 homes before it, the constant rejections, the people who called him broken and dangerous. He thought about always feeling like he did not belong anywhere, like something inside him was wrong. Then he looked at Veckrith and saw something he had never seen before in anyone's eyes. Hope. When do we leave? The journey to Draconis Prime took 3 weeks through hyperspace. During that time, Veckrith taught Taeyong the basics of Parathi culture. He explained their honor codes, their warrior traditions, their philosophy that valued protective ferocity above all else. Humans fear your anger, Veckrith said during one lesson. They try to suppress it, to make you calm and docile. But to the Parathi, that fire within you is the very essence of what makes someone worthy. We do not ask our warriors to control their rage. We ask them to channel it, to direct it toward protecting those who cannot protect themselves. For the first time in his life, Taeyong heard someone say that his nature was not a flaw but a strength. When they arrived at Draconis Prime, Taeyong stood at the viewport of the ship, staring in awe at the Parathi homeworld. Crystal cities rose from volcanic plains that glowed with inner heat. 3 moons hung in a purple sky, and everywhere, massive dragon beings moved through the air and across the ground with terrible grace. But his arrival was not universally welcomed. When Veckrith presented him to Parathi Council, many reacted with outrage and disgust. High Counselor Zareth, a scarred veteran with black scales that seemed to absorb light, was the most vocal opponent. This is what our mighty empire has been reduced to? Zareth's voice boomed through the council chamber, begging a mammal child to save us? This human is an insult to our legacy and our pride. Send him back to his primitive world before we become a laughingstock among the stars. Other council members murmured agreement. They saw Taeyong as small, weak, fundamentally inferior. How could this tiny human possibly be their salvation? Queen Ashera, attended by medical equipment that barely kept her alive, raised her claw for silence. Her voice was weak, but carried absolute authority. He will face the traditional trials. If he survives, he earns a right to be considered as heir. If he fails, we will know the prophecy was false. The trials would test 3 fundamental aspects of Parathi nature: the ability to withstand fire, the strength of will, and the willingness to sacrifice for others. For 6 months, Taeyong trained under Veckrith and the Queen's elite guard. They taught him Parathi combat techniques, flowing, aggressive movements that channeled emotion into physical power. They educated him in their philosophy and history. They pushed his body beyond what any human should be able to endure. Strange changes began occurring. Taeyong's eyes, which had only glowed faintly before, now shone with constant amber light. His skin developed patterns that resembled scales, appearing and disappearing based on his emotional state. His body temperature climbed even higher, reaching levels that would kill a normal human. The Parathi geneticists studied him constantly, fascinated by what they found. His dormant Parathi DNA was activating, rewriting parts of his human biology. He was becoming something new, something that had never existed before, a bridge between 2 species. Then came the first trial, the trial of flame. Taeyong had to walk through a chamber filled with plasma fire hot enough to melt steel. His hybrid biology gave him resistance that no pure human could possess, but it was not immunity. He entered the chamber and began walking, each step agony as the plasma burned his skin. He emerged on the other side alive, but covered in severe burns that took weeks to heal. While Taeyong trained and faced his trials, something dangerous was happening at the edges of the Draconis Empire. The hierarchy, a coalition of insectoid species from the outer regions, had been watching the Parathi carefully. For years, they had observed the once mighty dragon empire growing weaker, their numbers declining, their military forces stretched thin across too many worlds. The hierarchy's leaders were cold, calculating beings who thought only in terms of resources and territory. They saw opportunity where others might have seen tragedy. The Parathi controlled some of the most valuable star systems in the galaxy, rich with rare minerals and strategic hyperspace routes. For centuries, no one dared challenge the dragons for these territories. But now, With the Parathi dying out, the hierarchy decided the time had come to strike. They began quietly, taking small border worlds that had minimal defenses. Parathi colonies that housed only a few hundred dragons fell to hierarchy, swarms numbering in the millions. The insectoid soldiers moved like living waves, overwhelming defenders through sheer numbers. 3 worlds fell before the Parathi Central Command even realized they were under coordinated attack. By the time Taeyong completed his final trial, 7 Parathi worlds had been conquered. The hierarchy controlled nearly a tenth of what had once been dragon territory. Then, demonstrating their confidence, they sent an official message to Draconis Prime. The ultimatum was simple and brutal. Surrender all Parathi worlds within 30 days, or the hierarchy will begin systematically destroying every dragon planet, killing every remaining member of the species. The message arrived on the same day Taeyong emerged from medical care after the trial of sacrifice. The Parathi Council gathered in emergency session, their chamber filled with angry voices and desperate arguments. Some advocated for immediate military action. Others suggested negotiation. A few even whispered about accepting the surrender terms, hoping the hierarchy might allow the remaining Parathi to live as refugees on neutral worlds. In the midst of this chaos, Queen Ashera sent a private message requesting Taeyong come to her chamber immediately. Taeyong walked through the crystal corridors toward the Queen's private rooms, his body still aching from injuries that had not fully healed. When he entered, he barely recognized the being before him. The Queen, who had seemed so powerful during his arrival, now looked like a fading shadow. Her scales had lost all color, turning completely gray. Her breathing was labored, each breath a visible struggle. Medical equipment surrounded her, desperately trying to keep her alive for just a bit longer. But her eyes still held intelligence and strength. When she saw Taeyong, she managed a faint smile. "Come closer, young one," she whispered, her voice barely audible even in the silent room. Taeyong approached and knelt beside her platform, bringing his face level with hers. Up close, he could see how much pain she was in, how much effort it took for her to remain conscious. "You have heard about the hierarchy's ultimatum?" she asked. "Yes, my queen. The council is debating what to do." Ashera made a sound that might have been a laugh if she had the strength. "They debate because they are afraid. Fear makes even the bravest warriors hesitate. But you and I, Taeyong, we do not have the luxury of time for fear." She paused, gathering strength for what she needed to say. "I am dying. Perhaps I have hours left, perhaps days, but certainly not weeks." The hierarchy timed their ultimatum knowing this. They believe that without me, the Parathi will collapse into chaos and accept surrender. "They're wrong," Taeyong said firmly. "The Parathi are stronger than they think. Perhaps, but strength without leadership is merely anger without purpose." Ashara's eyes locked onto his. "That is why I summoned you. I need to tell you what it truly means to be Parathi before my time ends." Taeyong listened carefully as the dying queen spoke. Her voice grew weaker with each sentence, but her words carried the wisdom of 3,000 years. "Being Parathi is not about biology," she explained. "It is not about scales or plasma breath, or even the fire in our blood. Those are merely tools. Being Parathi is about what you choose to do with those tools." She gestured weakly toward the window, where the lights of the capital city glowed in the darkness. "We were not always good rulers. In our early history, we were conquerors who took what we wanted through force. We justified our actions by saying we were superior to other species. We were wrong. It took us thousands of years to learn a simple truth. Strength exists to protect, not to dominate." Taeyong thought about his own life, about how he had always felt compelled to protect weaker children, even when it got him into trouble. "That's why I always fought," he said quietly. "Not because I enjoyed it, but because I couldn't stand watching the strong hurt the weak." "Exactly. That is the fire I speak of, the fire that burns in a true Parathi heart. It is protective rage, fierce love, the willingness to stand between the vulnerable and those who would harm them, no matter the cost to yourself." Ashara's breathing became more difficult. "You demonstrated this in your 3rd trial. You could have saved yourself, but you chose to shield others instead. That choice defines what we truly are. The queen's claw moved slowly, reaching toward a small crystal sitting on a pedestal beside her platform. Taeyong helped her grasp it. The crystal began to glow with inner light. This contains the memories and wisdom of every Parathi ruler for the past 1,000,000 years, Ashera explained. It will integrate with your mind, giving you access to their knowledge and experience. But knowledge alone is not enough. You must also have the courage to lead when leadership seems impossible. She pressed the crystal into Taeyang's hand. The moment it touched his skin, information began flowing into his mind. Images, memories, emotions from countless rulers across eons of time. He gasped with the overwhelming sensation, but forced himself to remain focused on the queen. The council will debate for days about the hierarchy's ultimatum, Ashera continued. They will analyze military strength, discuss diplomatic options, calculate odds of survival. All of this is necessary, but it is not sufficient. What they need is someone who can make them remember who they are, warriors who never surrender, protectors who never abandon those counting on them. You want me to lead them into war, Taeyong said, understanding dawning. I want you to give them hope, Ashera corrected. Hope that even in their darkest moment, the Parathi fire still burns. Hope that one boy from a primitive world could carry their legacy forward. Hope that surrender is not the only option. The queen's breathing became even more labored. Medical alarms began sounding, but she waved away the automated systems trying to assist her. She had only moments left, and she needed to use them. I hereby name you Crown Prince Li Tingashara, official heir to the Draconis Empire and all its territories. You carry the fire forward now, young one. Do not let it be extinguished by fear or doubt. I won't, Taeyong promised, tears streaming down his face. I swear I won't. 6 months had passed since Queen Ashara's death and Taeyang's ascension as Crown Prince. 6 months of brutal, grinding warfare that consumed resources and lives on both sides. The hierarchy had expected a quick victory over the dying Parathi Empire, but they had not anticipated the young human prince who fought with ferocity that seemed impossible for someone so small and young. Taeyong had proven to be an unconventional military leader. He studied battles from both Parathi and human history, combining strategies from both species in ways that confused and frustrated the hierarchy's commanders. He refused to fight the war the way they expected, using guerrilla tactics, unexpected retreats that turned into traps, and sacrificing territory to create opportunities for devastating counterattacks. He had also succeeded in building a coalition of other species threatened by the hierarchy's expansion. The aquatic Tidalians, the crystalline lumens, and even representatives from Earth's young space colonies had joined the fight. Taeyang's hybrid nature made him a symbol of unity, proof that different species could work together, that strength came from diversity rather than uniformity. But the cost had been terrible. Parathi worlds burned. Coalition ships were destroyed by the thousands. The hierarchy's numerical advantage meant that even when Taeyong won battles, the enemy could simply send more soldiers. For every hierarchy ship destroyed, 3 more took its place. The coalition was slowly being ground down through attrition. Then the hierarchy changed tactics. If they could not break the coalition militarily, they would break its will to fight. The message came during a strategy session. Taeyong was reviewing battle plans with his senior commanders when an urgent communication arrived from one of the border systems. A refugee convoy, civilian ships carrying Parathi families, including children away from contested worlds, had been intercepted by a hierarchy fleet. The convoy had been unarmed, clearly marked with civilian identifiers, and had broadcast surrender signals immediately. Under every galactic law and convention, the hierarchy should have allowed them to pass or taken them as prisoners at worst. Instead, the hierarchy fleet had opened fire and destroyed every ship. Thousands died in seconds. Among them were the last Parathi children, the youngest members of a dying species, beings who represented whatever future the Parathi might still have. They had been evacuated specifically to keep them safe. Now they were gone, vaporized by plasma weapons, their lives snuffed out before they had barely begun. When Taeyong received the news, something inside him broke. The rage that he had learned to channel, to control, to direct toward productive ends, erupted like a volcano. His eyes blazed with fire, so bright that people in the command center had to look away. The temperature in the room rose dramatically as his body temperature spiked. His skin showed full-scale patterns for the first time, covering him from head to toe. He pulled up tactical displays and began issuing orders with a voice that resonated like a Parathi's, no longer quite human. Target every hierarchy, civilian population center within range. Prepare planet killer weapons. They murdered our children. We will show them what it means to face our wrath. The commanders in the room froze, shocked. What Taeyong was ordering would kill millions, perhaps billions of hierarchy civilians. It would be genocide on a scale rarely seen in galactic history. Some began following the orders immediately, too caught up in their own grief and rage to think clearly. Others hesitated, uncertain. The targeting systems began locking onto hierarchy worlds, weapons charging, countdown sequences initiating. Vekrith, who had been in another part of the command ship, arrived at a run. He took in the situation instantly. Taeyong consumed by rage, weapons preparing to fire, the point of no return approaching rapidly. Without hesitation, Vekrith crossed the room and physically grabbed Taeyong, lifted him off his feet despite the boy's enhanced strength. Taeyong struggled, trying to break free, his mind focused only on revenge and destruction. Vekrith slammed him to the ground, hard enough to knock the breath from his lungs. Then the old dragon pinned Taeyong there with his massive weight, bringing his face close to the boy's. The flame forges. It does not merely consume. Vekrith roared, his voice making the entire room vibrate. We do not murder children, even when they murder ours. That is what separates us from them. That is what makes us Parathi instead of monsters. Taeyong thrashed beneath him, still trying to break free, still consumed by rage. They killed our children. They deserved to die. All of them. Yes, they killed our children, Vekrith said, his own grief evident in his voice. And that pain will never leave us. But if you give this order, if you slaughter millions of innocent civilians, you become exactly what they are. You prove that they were right to fear us, right to see us as threats that needed to be eliminated. I don't care. Taeyong screamed. I want them to hurt like we hurt. Vekrith shifted his weight, applying more pressure. Queen Ashera chose you because you protected the weak. You fought bullies who hurt smaller children. You threw yourself over Parathi cadets to save their lives. That is who you are, Taeyong. That is the fire she saw in you. Protective rage, not murderous rage. There is a difference. Some of the fire in Taeyong's eyes began to dim. Vekrith saw doubt replacing absolute rage and pressed his advantage. If you give this order, every species in the galaxy will unite against us. Vekrith continued. They will hunt down every Parathi, every coalition member, everyone who followed your command. We will be remembered not as protectors, but as genocidal monsters. Is that the legacy you want? Is that how you honor the children who died? Taeyong stopped struggling. The scales on his skin began to fade. His eyes still glowed, but the light was no longer blinding. And then, finally, the dam broke. He began to cry, deep, racking sobs that shook his entire body. Vekrith released him and pulled the boy into an embrace, holding the way a father might hold a son. I know, the old dragon whispered. I know it hurts. I know you want to strike back. But we must be better than our pain. We must be what Ashera knew we could be. Around the command center, the other officers stood in uncomfortable silence. Many were crying themselves, grief for the lost children overwhelming their military discipline. The weapon systems remained charged but had not fired. They had come within seconds of a catastrophe. After several minutes, Taeyong pulled away from Vekrith and stood on shaking legs. He wiped his eyes and forced himself to look at his commanders. Cancel the strike orders, he said, his voice hoarse. All weapons stand down. The officers complied immediately, relief visible on their faces. The countdown sequences halted. The targeting locks disengaged. The moment of potential genocide passed. But Taeyong was not finished. His rage had not disappeared. It had transformed into something more dangerous and controlled. He pulled up the tactical display again, but this time he studied it with a clear mind. Taeyong floated in darkness. He could not feel his body. He could not hear anything. There was only silence and emptiness around him. In the medical center on Parathi, machines beeped slowly. Tubes connected to his arms. His chest rose and fell with help from a breathing machine. The doctors looked at their screens and shook their heads. His heart was too weak. His lungs were damaged. His body temperature would not stay normal. He should be dead, one doctor whispered to another. The final flame burns everything. No one survives it. But Taiyang's heart kept beating, slow but steady. His mother sat beside his bed every day. She held his hand and cried. She remembered the little boy who loved to draw pictures of stars. She remembered teaching him about both Earth and Parathi. Now that boy was a hero, but he might never wake up. Far away in space, something strange was happening. The hierarchy fleet moved away from Parathi space. Their giant ships turned around and left. For the first time in their long history, they retreated without winning a battle. On the hierarchy command ship, Warlord Zethrak stood alone in a dark room. He kept seeing the human boy in his mind, the boy who chose to burn himself to save others, the boy who showed no fear of death. We are supposed to be the strongest, Zethrak said to himself. We take what we want. We crush the weak. But that weak human boy had more strength than all of us. Other hierarchy leaders were confused. Some were angry. They wanted to go back and finish the war. But others felt something they had never felt before. Doubt. Maybe we are wrong, one young hierarchy warrior said in a meeting. Maybe strength is not just about power and weapons. The older warriors wanted to punish him for saying such things, but they could not, because they were thinking the same thoughts. Back on Parathi, Taiyang's body fought its silent battle. His human blood and Parathi blood worked together in ways the doctors did not understand. His cells repaired themselves slowly. His organs began to heal, but his mind stayed locked in darkness. In his coma, Taeyang dreamed. He saw his father's face. He saw the flames. He saw the Parathi people running to safety. He saw everything he had lost and everything he had saved. His mother never left his side. She talked to him even though he could not hear. She told him stories about his father. She sang him old Earth songs. She whispered in his ear, "Please come back to us." The doctors said his brain was still working. They said he might hear her voice somewhere deep inside. So she kept talking. She kept hoping. Days became weeks. The burns on Taiyang's body slowly healed, leaving scars. His vital signs got a little stronger each day, but his eyes stayed closed. His hand did not squeeze back when his mother held it. News of what happened spread across the galaxy. Humans on Earth heard about the boy who saved the Parathi. Parathi people created murals showing Taeyang surrounded by golden flames. Even some hierarchy worlds heard the story, and it made them uncomfortable. On the 20th day, Taeyang's fingers moved, just a tiny twitch. The nurse saw it and called the doctor. They checked all the machines. His brain activity was increasing. On the 21st day, his eyes moved under his closed eyelids. His mother was sleeping in the chair beside him. She did not see it. On the 22nd day, nothing changed. The doctor started to worry again. Maybe those small signs meant nothing. On the 23rd day, in the quiet morning, Taeyang's mother was reading him a story. It was an old Earth tale about a phoenix, a bird that burns and comes back to life. As she read the last line, she felt something. His hand squeezed hers. She looked down. His eyes were open. They were dim and tired, but they were open. He looked at her and tried to speak. No sound came out. His throat was too dry, but his lips moved. She leaned close. "What is it, my son?" He tried again. This time, she heard him. It was barely a whisper, rough and broken. "Did they survive?" Tears ran down her face. She nodded and smiled. "Yes, everyone survived. Because of you." His eyes closed again, but this time it was just sleep. Normal, healing sleep. The doctors rushed in when they heard her crying. But these were happy tears. Taeyang was coming back. The boy who burned himself to save others was returning to life.